really pushing the entire region into a dangerous new chapter. We're going to look at how this conflict spiraled out, changing the old rules of engagement and creating a huge crisis for the Palestinian leadership itself. Before we jump into all the analysis and the data, let's just take a second with this thought. So the events of October 7th, they weren't just a flashpoint for Israel and Palestine. They were a genuine turning point for the entire Middle East. The ripples from this have been felt in ways that no conflict has managed in decades. And one of the biggest impacts has actually been internal, on the Palestinian leadership. According to some deep analysis from the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, this war has basically just decimated whatever credibility the Palestinian Authority, or the PA, had left with its own population. And the numbers? Wow, they really tell the story. Polling from earlier this year shows that public satisfaction with the PA's president, Mahmoud Abbas, has just tanked. We're talking 11%. That's not just low, that's a sign of a massive, massive disconnect. And you can see this even more clearly when you ask people about the future. Like, okay, who should be in charge of Gaza after the war? Almost 60% of people say Hamas. Only 11% want the PA under President Abbas. This really shines a spotlight on this deep crisis of legitimacy that we're going to come back to in a bit. So let's look at how this local crisis just exploded onto the regional stage. It didn't stay put. It actually sparked a direct state-on-state fight that completely upended decades of, shadow warfare between two major powers, Iran and Israel. It all happened so fast back in April 2024. The long-standing, unwritten rules of the game were just shattered. First, you had an Israeli strike on an Iranian diplomatic building in Syria. Then, less than 2 weeks later, Iran fired back with this massive, never-before-seen wave of drones and missiles launched right from its own soil. And then, Israel responded with its own strike inside Iran. So here's the absolute crucial point. This was a historic shift. For years and years, Iran and Israel fought each other through other groups, proxies, in places like Lebanon or Syria. This direct exchange of fire, this was something totally new, and frankly, way more dangerous for the stability of the whole region. Okay, so we've been looking at this from 30,000 feet, the big picture stuff. Now I want us to pivot completely and look at the brutal human reality of this war. And to do that, we're going to turn to the testimony of someone who was right there, on the ground. This quote, it's incredibly stark. It comes from Colonel Tony Aguilar, a retired U.S. Army Special Forces officer. This is a guy with 25 years of combat experience in Iraq, Afghanistan, all over. He was in Gaza trying to help with aid distribution, and he said that what he saw there was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed in his entire career. And based on his expertise in the laws of war, Colonel Aguilar actually documented a whole series of actions that he says are clear violations of the Geneva Conventions. Things like setting up aid sites right in the middle of combat zones, or using lethal weapons like machine guns for crowd control. It's a pretty damning list. He literally called the aid sites death traps. Think about that for a second. The very process that was supposed to bring relief was, in his words, putting people in incredible danger. He saw a direct link. Every time there was a food distribution, the hospitals would be flooded with casualties right after. And to make it real, he tells this one story about a boy named Amir who happened to be the same age as his own son. Amir walked 12 kilometers just to find food for his family, and he was killed. For Aguilar, that boy's story really became the face of this whole tragedy of innocent people caught in the crossfire. So after hearing testimony like that, let's try to zoom back out and figure out, where does this all go from here? Analysts have mapped out a few potential futures for the region, and honestly, they range from pretty bad to truly catastrophic. So there are basically three paths. Scenario 1 is a sort of contained, low-intensity conflict where the PA hangs on, but it's weak. Scenario 2, things get hotter, the PA's stability is really threatened, and armed groups get stronger. And then there's Scenario 3, a full-blown regional war where the PA would probably collapse, maybe kicking off a third intifada, and even pulling the US into the fighting. This huge crisis of legitimacy for the Palestinian Authority. This isn't just some internal political drama. It's a critical factor in all three of those scenarios. It's creating this power vacuum that could destabilize the entire region. So what's really going wrong? Well, the research points to three core problems that have basically crippled the PA. First, a total loss of legitimacy because there haven't been elections. Second, this deep 17-year-old split between the West Bank and Gaza. And third, a general feeling that it's just inefficient and corrupt. And this polling data, it just lays it all out there. When you ask Palestinians point blank, who deserves to lead you, almost half pick Hamas. Only 17% pick Fatah, which is the party that runs the Palestinian Authority. That right there is the political reality driving this whole crisis. So, with a crisis this deep, what can even be done? Well, the same analysis that points out all the problems also offers a path forward. It's a tough one for sure, but it's a clear one for the PA to try and get back on its feet. The plan has three main parts. First, hold elections, like right away, to get some legitimacy back. Second, form a unity government to finally end that 17-year split with Hamas. And third, get serious about reform, tackle corruption, and actually prove you can govern. And the stakes, they couldn't be higher. The warning is crystal clear. Doing nothing is not an option. If the Palestinian Authority doesn't take these kinds of drastic steps, it risks becoming a total non-factor in a post-war Gaza and could just completely collapse. And that really leaves us with the central question, doesn't it? What you should take away from this whole explainer is just how incredibly complex this is. The plan has three main parts. First, hold elections, like right away, to get some legitimacy back. Second, form a unity government to finally end that 17-year split with Hamas. And third, get serious about reform, tackle corruption, and actually prove you can govern. And the stakes, they couldn't be higher. The warning is crystal clear. Doing nothing is not an option. If the Palestinian Authority doesn't take these kinds of drastic steps, it risks becoming a total non-factor in a post-war Gaza and could just completely collapse. And that really leaves us with the central question, doesn't it? What you should take away from this whole explainer is just how incredibly complex this is. Trying to find a path to peace means you're not just dealing with a regional powder keg, but also a profound internal leadership crisis.